Hello, happy Hanukkah to all who celebrate, and welcome to episode 255 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. For well over a year, I have been doing special episodes almost every month about the tenure of former Disney chairman and CEO Michael Eisner. In that time, I have repeatedly mentioned the Disney Renaissance, an era of Disney animation where seemingly everything they released was a timeless classic. Even the films from that time that didn't age as well still have plenty of fans and can still be noticed showing up with references in the theme parks. Today, and in a future episode, we're going to talk about the Disney Renaissance in depth. Before we get started, we are right in the middle of Vlogmas. Every day this month, I have a new video vlog or podcast on the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. Make sure you are checking out all of that content, clicking the like button, and dropping positive comments on everything that you love. Also, I really would love to grow our subscription numbers before the end of the year. Please make sure that you are subscribed to the YouTube channel. It is 100% free, and it just takes 30 seconds. While we're at it, I'm at Rick_ear on Twitter. My Blue Sky handle is at Rick Doherty TGTT. I will have some big news coming up soon, and I would love to be able to share that with all of you. Let's get started talking about the Disney Renaissance. When Michael Eisner took over as chairman and CEO of the Walt Disney Company in 1984, he was the first person to ever run the company who wasn't promoted from within or, in some cases, part of the Disney family. A fresh set of eyes led to a fresh perspective on many things. For example, just 2 years after Epcot opened at Walt Disney World, attendance at the park was already slipping a little. Eisner asked the question that I think a lot of Disney fans were asking themselves about the company's first non-castle park. Where is Mickey Mouse? On April 15th of 1985, Eisner ended the no Mickey rule at Epcot. With many of the classic characters added to the park, it started to feel more Disney. It seems so obvious that a Disney theme park should have the most iconic character make an appearance. Eisner also wanted to know something else that I think every Disney fan really was wondering as well. Why isn't Disney making princess movies anymore? On December 21st of 1937, Disney released the first full-length animated film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, at Carthay Circle Theater on San Vicente Avenue in Los Angeles. It became an instant sensation. Walt Disney and the Seven Dwarfs appeared on the cover of Time magazine. Walt was given a special commemorative Oscar by the Academy Awards. It also became the highest-grossing sound film of all time before it was passed shortly by Gone with the Wind, which was released in 1939. On a budget of $1.5 million, it made an astonishing $418 million. Walt Disney went back to the well again in 1950, adapting another fairy tale with another princess. Cinderella cost $2.2 million and had another huge box office take with $182 million. As much as we mock Bob Iger for his endless sequels and franchise movies, even though Walt Disney himself said you can't top Pigs with Pigs about the prospect of a sequel to The Three Little Pigs, Walt had found success twice with Princess Fairy Tales. There was absolutely no way he wasn't going to try for a third major hit with the formula. As a matter of fact, Walt so badly wanted Sleeping Beauty to be a success that he made Aurora's Castle the centerpiece of his new theme park in Anaheim, California. On July 17th of 1955, 3.5 years before the movie was released, Sleeping Beauty Castle was standing at the end of Main Street, USA, as the entrance to Fantasyland for the opening day of Disneyland. It wasn't Snow White's castle, and it wasn't Cinderella's castle. The company was sure it was going to have another hit on its hands. Disney Animation wasn't going to cheap out on the product either. With a production budget of $6 million, Sleeping Beauty debuted on January 29th of 1959 after several production delays. This meant that the film cost more than twice as much as Disney Animation's previous 3 movies, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, and Lady and the Tramp. The general public didn't flock to the theaters for Princess Aurora at nearly the rate it had for Snow White and Cinderella. The distributor's share of what the film grossed was $5.3 million on a movie that made just over $51 million at the box office in the US and Canada. Buena Vista Distribution, which was the division of Disney that was responsible for distributing the movie, actually lost $900,000 on Sleeping Beauty. The Walt Disney Company posted a $1.3 million annual loss for the fiscal year of 1960 and ended up laying off people throughout the animation department. Sleeping Beauty was a disaster for business, and the Walt Disney Company stopped putting so much focus on animation and still had not made another animated princess movie when Michael Eisner took over the company in 1984. In his second year in charge of Disney, Eisner dipped his toe into the waters of home video and eventually created the infamous Disney Vault. In 1985, Disney released Pinocchio on VHS with the promise that it was only for a limited time, and it was a relatively big success. The artificial scarcity helped Disney put a bigger price tag on the product while also making it feel like a collector's item for customers. After that, many execs wanted to build off of Pinocchio's success by releasing the biggest fish of them all for home video in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Michael Eisner balked at that because he was worried about diminishing the value of the property, especially if they wanted to re-release it in theaters, as they had already done a number of times. Instead, Eisner went with another Disney princess movie that didn't do as well at the box office. Projections were that Sleeping Beauty could generate $125 million over the course of 28 years of theatrical releases under the old plan, but it could make $100 million in half of a year in home video releases. Sleeping Beauty, the first princess movie to bomb at the box office, and the one that ended Disney's desire to even make princess movies, sold 1.3 million copies on VHS. Even after being re-released in theaters in 1987, Cinderella hit the market on VHS in 1988, and it was another huge financial success for Disney, selling 6 million copies. The Disney Vault, combined with Eisner's theme park ticket price increases that didn't impact attendance, gave the company a ton of money in the gear up to the 90s. The subsequent success of Who Framed Roger Rabbit and the attention it brought to the theme parks didn't hurt. The success of Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella on home video also made Eisner ask another important question: why don't we make more Disney princess movies? Walt Disney himself wanted to make a movie version of Hans Christian Andersen's story, The Little Mermaid. Development of the movie actually started shortly after the success of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in the late 30s. Plans were canceled at the time, but no good idea ever truly disappears. Ron Clements was an animator and writer at Disney. In 1985, while serving as the director for The Great Mouse Detective, Clements found a copy of The Little Mermaid while perusing the shelves at a bookstore. Not only did Clements think the subject matter was perfect for a Disney movie, but he was also fascinated by the prospect of an animated movie that took place mostly underwater. Jeffrey Katzenberg was the chief at Walt Disney Studios at the time, and he was initially uninterested in The Little Mermaid because the studio was working on a sequel to the live-action Tom Hanks movie Splash. Katzenberg was worried that the two projects would be too similar. However, he eventually acquiesced to move forward with the project at the same time as Oliver and Company. Danish illustrator Kay Nielsen, who had done many of the story sketches for Fantasia, had also worked on some initial story ideas for The Little Mermaid in the 30s. Clements' original ideas for changes to the Hans Christian Andersen story were very similar to what Nielsen had created about half a century earlier. Along with his fellow Great Mouse Detective director John Musker, Clements put together a 20-page rough script that added many of the elements we would see in the final product. The role of the mermaid's grandmother was removed, which is a little funny considering how heavily future Disney princess movies would rely on grandmother characters, and the roles of the Mermaid King and the evil Sea Witch were enhanced. When songwriter Howard Ashman was brought onto the project, he came up with some of his own ideas, like changing the minor character of Clarence, the English butler crab, to the Jamaican sidekick Sebastian. This would give Ashman the ability to write more upbeat, Caribbean-inspired songs. Looking back on it, the most successful idea Disney had come up with for The Little Mermaid was to adapt the story structure to that of a Broadway musical. Katzenberg, Clements, Musker, and Asham all worked on this change, understanding that it would have a huge impact on the final project. Alan Menken was also added to the project to work on the overall theatrical score. After Oliver and Company was released in 1988, Disney focused an enormous amount of attention to The Little Mermaid. More money and resources were allocated to the project than any other animated film Disney had produced in decades. Even Michael Eisner's newest theme park at Walt Disney World played a big part in making the movie. Disney MGM Studios opened on May 1st, 1989, and a satellite animation facility in the park was used to assist the main facility in Glendale, California with ink and paint support. Animators also went back to the days when Walt Disney ran the company to use some similar tactics to bring back that early magic. One of those tactics was to film live actors and actresses to use as motion references. When trying to come up with another classic Disney princess, the animators and writers based the body type and personality of Ariel on Alyssa Milano. At the time, Milano was starring on Who's the Boss on ABC. Meanwhile, Howard Ashman suggested a young singer with whom he had worked on the Broadway show Smile for an audition as Ariel. Jodie Benson, of course, was the perfect fit for the role. It was the first movie of her career, and she voiced Ariel ever since. She also had a cameo in the live-action version of the movie in 2023. Ursula was such an iconic character in addition to Ariel. It has been mentioned a million times by now, but in Disney's tradition of gay-coding villains, Ursula was based on the drag queen Divine. Pat Carroll, who made the role her own, was not Disney's first choice. Disney owned the television sitcom The Golden Girls, and they initially wanted Bea Arthur, who was the star of that show. She turned it down, and Roseanne Barr and Nancy Wilson of the band Heart were considered for the role before Carroll was selected. Comedians Jim Carrey, Bill Maher, and Michael Richards were all considered for secondary roles in the film before the premieres for In Living Color, Politically Incorrect, and Seinfeld. The film cost $40 million to make, and it made $235 million at the box office. Unlike so many current Disney movies that make tons of money, this one had a cultural impact that even dwarfed the box office. Alan Menken won the Academy Award and Golden Globe for Best Original Score, and Menken and Ashman won at both of those award ceremonies for Best Original Song for Under the Sea. The duo also won the Grammy for Best Song written specifically for a motion picture or television for Under the Sea, and the soundtrack won the Grammy for Best Recording for Children. Those are just some of the awards that the movie won. Disney Animation not only had a success, but they also had a blueprint for future success. Audiences loved the Broadway format. Audiences were thrilled to get another Disney princess movie. Personally, I've mentioned that one of the coolest things that has happened to me as a result of this podcast was when I had media credentials for the Tampa Bay Comic-Con last year. I was able to attend Jodie Benson's panel in a room of probably around 100 people and probably no more than 10 feet away from my seat. Benson performed Part of Your World at the table. She was 62 years old at the time, but she still sounded just as great as she did in the late 80s. That is one of my absolute favorite movies from my time doing this show to this point. 364 days after The Little Mermaid debuted in theaters, Disney followed it up with the second film of the Disney Renaissance, Rescuers Down Under. This was a sequel to the 1977 movie The Rescuers and was the first animated sequel the studio had ever released theatrically. While the timing puts this film in the Disney Renaissance, including its mid-November premiere, we won't be spending much time on this one. It really doesn't fit with the themes of the rest of the Renaissance. First of all, it was blatantly based on the strange Australian craze of the 1980s, with bands like Midnight Oil and Men at Work having huge success, and most importantly, Crocodile Dundee being a smash hit in theaters. The movie also didn't feature any original songs, making it only the second Disney animated movie to hold that distinction after The Black Cauldron. While The Black Cauldron certainly has a cult following now, it was certainly not a hit at the time. Rescuers Down Under had a disappointing opening weekend, at least by Disney standards, finishing fourth with a $3.5 million gross. It was beaten by Home Alone, Rocky V, and Child's Play 2. It failed to even make $28 million in the US, and it made just over $47 million worldwide, with a particularly impressive showing in Germany. Critics were generally favorable to the movie, including Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times, who gave the film 3 out of 4 stars. Still, The Rescuers Down Under was considered a box office failure. To magnify the size of the disappointment, Disney was planning on creating an animated television series based on the Rescuers' characters. After the bomb, the company quickly shifted gears and turned the show into Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. It just didn't have the cultural relevance of The Little Mermaid or the later Disney Renaissance movies, and feels more a part of the disappointments that were given the green light before the Eisner era. Even if Eisner did okay some of those disappointments, it always takes a CEO some time to make changes to the organization. Aircraft carriers and cruise ships don't turn around on a dime, and companies like the Walt Disney Company take even more time to change directions. To further emphasize the disappointment in this movie, it was the last Disney animated sequel to go to theaters until Frozen 2 in November of 2019. That is a span of almost 30 years. To find the real successor to The Little Mermaid, you have to look at November 22nd of 1991. As a matter of fact, just like how Walt Disney wanted to do an animated version of The Little Mermaid in the aftermath of Snow White's success, in the 1930s and later in the 1950s, Walt pursued the possibility of an animated version of Beauty and the Beast. After initial scripts and storyboards for Beauty and the Beast were too dark and didn't contain any music, Jeffrey Katzenberg asked John Musker and Ron Clements to use the chemistry they brought to The Little Mermaid to fix the newest project. Musker and Clements, however, were mentally drained from their most recent success. Disney then tapped Kirk Wise and Gary Truesdell, who had directed the animated section of Cranium Command, which was a short film at Epcot. Katzenberg was desperate to catch lightning in a bottle a second time. He wanted to bring back Howard Ashman and Alan Menken. They adapted the Little Mermaid story from Hans Christian Andersen and turned it into a Broadway-style musical, and he wanted them to do the same for Beauty and the Beast. There was one problem, and it was a tragic problem. Ashman was dying. He had AIDS, and the complications of the disease were making it hard for him to work on anything past his pet project, an adaptation of a story from 1001 Nights, or as many know it in English, Arabian Nights. At the time, Michael Eisner wasn't sure that an animated film based in the Middle East would be commercially successful, so he tried to scrap the project and get everyone focused on Beauty and the Beast. After all, Beauty and the Beast took place in France, which was coincidentally where Eisner was working on building a new international theme park. To accommodate Ashman's health issues, pre-production for Beauty and the Beast was moved from London to a hotel in Fishkill, New York. The Residence Inn was close enough to Ashman's home to allow him to work on the script with Menken, Wise, Truesdale, and others. The biggest issue was that the original fairy tale version of the story only had two major characters. Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg wanted them to stick to the formula. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Beauty and the Beast needed a true villain in the vein of Maleficent, Captain Hook, and of course, Ursula. The film also needed cute side characters that would add levity to the darker moments and keep children engaged throughout the plot. The production team took a lot of inspiration from the 1946 French movie adaptation of the story. That film, which was one of the reasons Walt Disney delayed the project again in the 1950s, had many of the inanimate objects in Beast Castle come to life. The movie also added an antagonist who was romantically interested in the main female character. Originally, Disney might have been trying a little too hard to stick to the formula, as they initially considered bringing Jodie Benson back to provide the voice for Belle. Wanting a vocalist who sounded a little more adult than Benson, they picked Broadway actress and singer Paige O'Hara. Comparing O'Hara to Judy Garland, co-director Kirk Wise said that she, quote, had a unique quality, a tone she would hit that made her special. O'Hara had been in theater since 1975, appearing in Showboat, Oklahoma, Evita, and more. In fact, O'Hara thinks that her performance on the cast recording to Showboat was what sold Howard Ashman on her talents. She modeled her interpretation of Belle on Katharine Hepburn's performance in Little Women in 1933. Bigger Hollywood names found themselves on the shortlist for the role of Beast 5 years after Top Gun, and a few years before Tombstone and Batman. Val Kilmer was considered. The legendary Lawrence Fishburne was mentioned, and Broadway music star Mandy Patinkin, who had just performed in the Touchstone Pictures film Dick Tracy for Disney, were all on the short list. They ended up going with 70s teen idol Robbie Benson, who really was solid in that role. Angela Lansbury, who was so iconic as Mrs. Potts, almost didn't get the job because Mary Poppins herself, Julie Andrews, was one of the early choices for the role. MASH's David Ogden Stiers started his lucrative relationship with Disney Animation when John Cleese of Monty Python fame turned down the role of Cogsworth to voice a character in An American Tail, Fievel Goes West. Disney knew it had a different type of animated movie on its hands with Beauty and the Beast, and the company marketed it as such. Appealing to both children and adults, Disney even produced 2 different movie posters to preview the film. One of the posters was bright and highlighted the traditional animation, while a second poster that appeared more in newspapers featured a silhouette of the 2 main characters slow dancing in shadows. They even promoted the film in different ways than normal kid-focused movies. An unfinished version played at the New York Film Festival on September 29th of 1991. A completed version was shown at the 1992 Cannes Film Festival, even though it was not involved in the competition. Disney knew that this was going to be a critical success. Its full release was on November 22nd of 1991, which was the same day as An American Tail, Fievel Goes West. Since American Tail was so focused on attracting kids, expanding the customer base for Beauty and the Beast was a smart move. Kids wanted to see animated movies, but parents ultimately decide where the money gets spent. That made Beauty and the Beast a great compromise pick for a family. Roger Ebert wrote, quote, Beauty and the Beast reaches back to an older and healthier Hollywood tradition in which the best writers, musicians, and filmmakers are gathered for a project on the assumption that a family audience deserves great entertainment too. Ebert gave the film a perfect score and compared it to past Disney animated classics like Snow White and Pinocchio. Film critic Gene Siskel, who famously starred in a television show with Ebert in which the two reviewed movies, believed this one movie would revive the tradition of movie musicals. on their show, Siskel and Ebert both believed it was a legitimate contender for Best Picture at the Oscars. That would prove prophetic because Beauty and the Beast was the first animated movie ever nominated for Best Picture, although it did not win in that category. It did win Academy Awards for Best Original Score and Best Original Song for Beauty and the Beast. It won Best Original Score and Best Original Song at the Golden Globes. It also picked up Best Motion Picture, Musical or Comedy. The music also picked up 5 Grammy Awards. Beauty and the Beast was also the first film of the Disney Renaissance to have a legitimate hit. In a move Disney would replicate numerous times up to the present, a radio version of one of the soundtrack's songs was recorded by pop artists. The title track of the film was recorded by Celine Dion with Peabo Bryson. The song peaked at number 9 on the US charts and showed the company that there were other ways to promote these animated movies to adult audiences. For the remainder of the Disney Renaissance, every one of their animated films would have a song hit the charts, even though Mulan would fail to place a song on the US charts. On a budget of $25 million, Beauty and the Beast made $451.2 million and solidified the return of the Disney princess movie. Even though the story was focused more on Beast's growth, Belle and Ariel joined Snow White, Cinderella, and Aurora as staples of Disney marketing and in the theme parks. The Disney Vault played a huge part in the creation of the Disney Renaissance and the return of the Disney princess, but Michael Eisner wasn't going to allow these major successes to just make box office revenue. Eventually, The Little Mermaid would have a direct-to-video sequel in The Little Mermaid 2, Return to the Sea, and a direct-to-video prequel with The Little Mermaid, Ariel's Beginning. The sequel solidified Ariel as the first and thus far only Disney princess to have a child. The Little Mermaid 2 focuses on Ariel's daughter Melody. Beauty and the Beast had 2 direct-to-video sequels, Beauty and the Beast, The Enchanted Christmas, and Beauty and the Beast, Belle's Magical World. As I had mentioned earlier, Howard Ashman had agreed to work on Beauty and the Beast reluctantly. He wanted to work on his pet project, and he knew his time was limited, as he continued to lose strength due to the complications from his AIDS diagnosis. Finally, however, he was gonna get to work on the movie he had been pitching to Michael Eisner since 1988. He wanted to make a campy 1930s style musical about one of the stories from Arabian Nights. Despite Eisner's previously stated concerns about the Middle East setting, Ashman had more than delivered on The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast. By the time Ron Clements and John Musker had decided they were ready to work on another Disney animated project following The Little Mermaid, the duo was given the choice between 3 potential stories: an adaptation of Swan Lake, a movie at the time titled King of the Jungle, but would be renamed later The Lion King, and Ashman's Arabian Nights story. They picked the story from Arabian Nights. Any concerns about Americans going to see an animated movie set in the Middle East were set aside by Eisner because he was reuniting the team that launched the Disney Renaissance. The result of the collaboration would lead to the second highest grossing animated film of the era, and one that had cultural relevance stretching way beyond the world of animation. It would make over $500 million at the box office, produce a song that hit number 1 on the Billboard charts in the United States, and changed the way studios picked voice actors for animated movies. When Disney was casting for The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, celebrities were often cast as voice actors in animation, but it was never the major selling point for the film. Comedian Bob Newhart provided his voice to the Rescuers Down Under, but Disney didn't market the film as being a Bob Newhart vehicle. Disney didn't expect people to be drawn to the theaters because the guy who played Charles Emerson Winchester III on MASH was voicing a clock in Beauty and the Beast. On November 25th of 1992, all of that changed. From Mike Myers and Eddie Murphy in Shrek to Matthew McConaughey in Sing, to Chris Rock in Madagascar, to Adam Sandler in Hotel Transylvania, to Steve Carell in Despicable Me, to Justin Timberlake in Trolls. Big names became the biggest promotional tools for animated features. For better or for worse, having a story that appealed to both adults and children didn't mean as much as getting celebrities who would appeal to the adults and a script that would appeal to children. Next month, I will resume our conversation about the Disney Renaissance by talking about the 1992 classic Aladdin. Disney made a fortune by attaching the film to one of the most beloved celebrities in the world and proceeded to alienate him in the process. After Beauty and the Beast, the Disney Renaissance was set up for its two biggest financial successes, but then every subsequent movie seemed to have diminishing returns, or at least never reached the heights of the mid-90s. This has been episode 255 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. With Christmas coming up next week, I would like to ask everyone to give me that one thing that I want from you this holiday season. Please make sure you are subscribed to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. Once you're subscribed, watch videos, listen to podcasts, drop positive comments, and click that like button on everything. We are getting so close to hitting our 5-year anniversary, and we want to continue to grow in a meaningful way. That means we need to get ourselves into the algorithm. I've also been sharing a lot of great holiday content and recaps from earlier this year on the YouTube channel for Vlogmas. Also, in honor of the spirit of giving that comes this time of year, next Thursday, which is Christmas Day, I will be doing something a little different. In March of last year, I had Susan from Indiana on the show. She was able to take her family to Orlando for a theme park vacation because of the people at Give Kids the World. Next week, we will revisit that conversation. I thought it would be the perfect way to end the year with some hope and positive vibes. We have always and will always focus on inclusion in this community. This seemed like the perfect way to commemorate our first Christmas Day with a new episode scheduled. You can hear that next Thursday on Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Until then, have a great week.